Please feed Mohan his dog food, pedigree, at 2 p.m. The packet is on the cupboard and his dog bowl is kept near the kitchen sink. I stared at the WhatsApp message, reading it again and again. My emotions were caught between bemusement and nervousness at the bizarre request. I know what you're all thinking. Just feed the dog his kibble. But here are the facts. Mohan is not a dog. He is a 10-year-old. To give you all some context upon my situation, I had agreed to babysit Mrs. Sharma's son Mohan because my mother wanted our new crazy neighbor to feel at home. And no, this was not a paid babysitting job. It was just an endeavor to build neighborly relations by my over-enthusiastic mother. But as I said just now, Mrs. Sharma was crazy. I'd only observed her twice, but both the moments left quite an impression upon me. The first one happened when I caught her cutting a bar of soap like a carrot upon my mother's chopping board. She had brought a pack of those as gifts when she first came to visit us. A brand new pack of expensive sandal soaps. At that time, I was reading a book from a position where she could not see me, but I could see her on the sofa chatting with my mother. But when my mother went to the terrace to fetch our drying clothes for 10 minutes, I surreptitiously watched her take one of the bars and start dicing it upon the chopping board my mother had just used for slicing radishes. I looked away after 5 minutes, but Mrs. Sharma had clearly left no trace of her actions because when my mother came back, they continued their nonsensical conversations, while my mother once again picked up her knife and continued chopping the remaining vegetables. Needless to say, I refused to eat dinner that night and ordered from Zomato. The second incident happened when I caught Mrs. Sharma tasting pedigree, a popular brand of dog food, when my mother and I were visiting her home. Mrs. Sharma went into her kitchen to pour some drinks and snacks for us, while we were waiting in her guest room. At that time, I had a sudden urge to use the washroom. I silently walked past the kitchen, but my eyes happened to glance upon her for a few seconds. And there she was, taking kibbles out of a pedigree packet and putting them in her mouth. I refused to eat anything she served me and my mom later on. I also mentally grimaced every time my mom picked a bite to eat. The woman clearly had issues, and I wish that my mom would have stayed clear of her, but fate had other plans. The two had become fast friends, and now I was saddled with babysitting Mrs. Sharma's 10-year-old son Mohan. When I had questioned my mother about why we didn't see Mohan during our visit to Mrs. Sharma's house, Mom told me it was because he had gone on a walk with a girl from our colony. My mom also gave me a list of written instructions on how to take care of that kid. I wished she would just WhatsApp me, but she just had to write it on paper in her terrible handwriting. Honestly, the only redeeming quality of Mrs. Sharma so far was that she was not as technophobic as my mother, and had agreed to message me the instructions. The babysitting ordeal was to last from 12 noon till 6 in the evening. I had not even glanced upon the list my mother had given me, as Mrs. Sharma had promised me that she would text me the relevant tasks throughout the day. So, with an irritated look upon my face, I went to pursue the challenge. I first saw Mohan in the living room of their house, watching television. An episode of Doraemon blared from the television, and I winced at how loud it was. But the kid was unaffected. Mrs. Sharma had just deposited the keys to her house with me right outside the house and left in a hurry, without even introducing me to her kid. Her craziness clearly wasn't going away anytime soon. I felt sorry for the kid for having such a weird mother without even having met him. So that is how I had relaxed a little and entered their living room after safely locking the door. I was told by my mother that Mohan was 10 years old, and he looked exactly like a normal 10-year-old would. He was watching the television screen with his black hair combed back, wearing a red t-shirt and a pair of comfortable pants. munching upon Maji noodles with a glass of mango juice nearby. I introduced myself to him, and he monotonously replied to my basic questions, his attention clearly fixed upon the television. But he looked comfortable enough, so I went into the guest bedroom of the house to watch Dairy Girls on Netflix, after reassuring him to call me if he needs anything. I was captivated by the show until Mrs. Sharma's message notification came on WhatsApp. That is when the weird message that I had talked about earlier came in, at 1:40 p.m., and reading the message made me wish that there was some version of CPS in India, because the entire event just screamed that something abusive was going on with Mohan and his mother. I wondered if Mrs. Sharma was joking with me, so I nervously went to the cupboard to see if I would actually find dog food over there. I was hoping that the last time I saw her eat pedigree kibbles in her kitchen was just some hallucination or glitch in the Matrix moment. But there it was, a yellow packet with a cute little golden retriever picture, a big packet of pedigree. I stared at it for a good 10 minutes, wondering what my next steps would be. Should I make a run for it and inform my mother about the incident? Or should I grab Mohan along with me too? Or should I just ignore my conscience and feed him the dog food and finish my babysitting task? Because if the past events were anything to go by, it certainly would not be the first time he would be eating it. My mind was racing in all directions until suddenly I heard scratching at one of the bedroom doors nearby. To say that my blood had turned to ice by now would be an understatement. I quickly ran to Mohan and asked him what was causing the scratching. Maybe it was just a pet that Mrs. Sharma had confused with Mohan, I thought nervously, but Mohan's reply caught me off guard. "It is the red man," he told me. "What?" "Just ignore him and open that door." After giving that vague answer, he went back to watching some cartoons. I was beyond scared by this point and just wanted to bolt out of the house, but one question still lingered in my mind. "Does your mother feed you pedigree?" I asked him cautiously. Mohan looked at me for a few seconds and nodded yes. I sucked in a breath and hurriedly told him to come with me to my house. He had clearly been abused and was under some delusion of the red man. I could not in good conscience leave the kid here with that crazy witch. So I just grabbed his arms and started dragging him with me. I frantically reassured him that we would call the police on his mother and he would be safe from her, but he quietly told me that there was no point to that. This made me pause in my tracks. I looked over my shoulder to see that he had suddenly become hunched over and was shaking with tears. "That woman is not my mother. My mother was killed 2 years ago. The red man had killed her, and if you try to complain about it, it will kill you." "What are you talking about?" I screamed at the kid, my mind spinning. "It's true. It used to be just me and my mom, the real Radhika Sharma. She used to be normal. But one weird rule existed in our house. Mom had forbidden me from going to the guest room of my house, claiming that a ghost lives there, and we should be wary of him. I used to be extremely afraid of that threat because I could sometimes hear scratching sounds from behind that locked door. One night, when I went to get water, I saw her standing outside the door to that room with a very frightened look on her face. I saw it. A red hand had suddenly emerged from the door and grabbed her inside. I ran back to my room and hid under the covers the entire night. I was sobbing throughout the night, and I was terrified that my mother had been killed. Terrified that the red man exists and that he would come after me. He never came out. The next day my mother came to wake me up. I was scared but happy to see her. But that morning for breakfast, she served me the pedigree that used to feed our dog at that time. Her eccentric behavior did not end there. She would always take baths with a mixture of milk and oil. She would sleep on the roof of our car with her eyes open. She would twist her neck at odd angles pretty often, and she would also cut up slices of soap to feed our dog. Our dog? He died soon because of that. I stared at Mohan with a numb feeling. He continued his rambles. I knew then that that thing was not my mother, that my mother was dead, and I also knew that whatever that thing is, it was trying to imitate humans. It has gotten rather good at it over 2 years. We moved a lot during that time. It will always chat up the new neighbors, trying to appear more and more normal. I knew it was some weird creature, but I also knew that it was not the Red Man, because no matter where we lived, there would always be one of our rooms that would be locked and off limits to me, and I could hear scratching behind it. He finally finished his story while sobbing throughout. I just kept on standing there, feeling like an icy hand had gripped my heart. I was not afraid for the kid. I knew he would somehow survive. I was afraid for myself, knowing that I had basically entered a haunted house. Mohan had escaped my grasp and ran upstairs, probably to cry to himself some more, but I knew that if I didn't get out of the house that second, my legs would give out and I would not escape alive. I was about to make a run for it when I heard a tire screech in the background. Mrs. Sharma, or more pointedly, the thing imitating her, was home. I just stood there frozen like a statue when the lock turned. The thing must have had a spare key, of course, and within minutes, it opened the door and entered the house with a cheery face. "Hello, dear. How was your day? I'm sorry I came home early. The grocery shop I like was closed today and I was free to come home early. I hope you had fun with Mohan today. He is very friendly." The thing grinned at me. I just stared in silence. Not a movement out of me. It moved towards the room from where the scratching sounds were coming from, still chatting me up. I hope Mohan ate his food properly. He generally is a good boy, but I had to discipline him for a very long time for him to reach that stage when it comes to food. I watched in silent horror as it came to stand before the door with the scratching sounds, but a confused expression came upon his face. "Dearie, did you not let Mohan out of the room?" "Huh?" The inquisitive expression just escaped my mouth, the first prickle of curiosity coming over me. Without any warning, its hands turned the handle and opened the door. I screamed and tried to make a run for it, until I heard a bark from behind me. I just froze upon the spot, slowly turning my head. I expected to see a grotesque red figure with a creepy smile coming at me with inhuman speed. Instead, a happy golden retriever ran up to me. I tried to collect my thoughts for a minute. I expected that this was all a show, and both the woman and dog would soon reveal their true paranormal forms. But nothing of that sort happened. The golden happily continued to hug me, and Mrs. Sharma watched with a worried look on her face. "Did you not feed him, dearie? Mohan must be very hungry now," Mrs. Sharma replied, pointing to the dog. "What are you talking about? Mohan is your son, isn't he?" "I refer to him as my son, but he's not my actual son, dearie. He's a dog." "Why are you asking such a weird question?" "But were you confused all this time because you thought I had an actual son? I never had a child, and I had never been married. I have only had one companion for 10 years, my beloved Mohan. Let me feed him now. He must be hungry." With that, she walked towards the kitchen. I just excused myself and ran to my home. I ambushed my mother as soon as I saw her. "Did you know that Mohan was a dog?" I angrily questioned my mother. "Of course. Why are you asking such an idiotic question? Was that not clear enough the first time you saw him? Mohan being a dog was literally the first thing I wrote on the list. But you did not read it. My mother chided me. I was at a complete loss of words. If Mohan was a dog, then who the hell was the boy I had talked to? Wanting more answers, I started narrating Mrs. Sharma's past actions to my mother. I told her about Mrs. Sharma's weird soap chopping and pedigree eating behaviors from earlier. I expected her to be shocked at this, but she only laughed. She was chopping the soap because I had asked her to do that, silly. I had wanted to take those pieces of soap to keep them in our potted plants. I had read somewhere that they repel insects and wanted to check for myself. And as far as the pedigree eating is concerned, she did not eat it. She told me that she puts a few pieces in her mouth to encourage Mohan to eat it. She sometimes does it even when he is not there out of absent-mindedness. You may think it is weird, but the tactic has been quite effective so far. With that, my mother started walking towards the dining table, still speaking. You have really disappointed me this time. I expected you would take better care of Mohan. You are lucky Mrs. Sharma is a sweet lady. She would probably forgive you. Mrs. Sharma had even brought you a gift for your taking care of Mohan. My mother kept on ranting. My mother painted towards a painting kept on the dining table, but as soon as I saw it, beads of sweat started collecting on my forehead, and I felt like I would faint, because the painting consisted of a picture of the same boy I had talked to earlier that day, and on the bottom right corner, it was signed as the Red Man. Since then, I have tried to throw out the painting multiple times, but it keeps on showing up in weird places in my house. So, all I am requesting you guys is that if you ever end up babysitting a kid talking about the Red Man, just call an exorcist.